So, home sweet home, Motley Crue. Exactly 8 o'clock. Welcome to a Monday edition of the Mornings with Ed show on the all-new Voice of Laguna, the world's greatest radio station. We are delighted that you're here across the country, across the globe, and here in Southern California. Welcome to the program. Each and every Monday morning at 8 o'clock, we do something called the Artist's Corner. And this morning, a very special Artist Corner, because at Home Sweet Home, I did that on purpose. Our guest this morning, Lisa, the intrepid Lisa Farber, went ahead and found a story that she sent to me a while back. I read the story in The Atlantic. Thank you, first of all, Lisa, for being here, and thank you for sending the story. Alec Frydman, local. Then see that's the button pusher right there. Local Alec Frydman was 27 years old in 2023 and just kind of bouncing around, wondering where life would take him. So he wanted to go to Australia to be a surfer and pick up chicks and do all kinds of cool stuff. So he thought he could make some money on a fishing boat, and he got trained to work that fishing boat. An 82-year-old fishing boat, by the way, that eventually capsized at sea and left him adrift on the ocean for 13 days. We welcome in for this, what's going to be a fascinating story and conversation, Alec Frydman. Alec, welcome, man. How are you?
I'm good. How about you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for being here this morning, man. Are you a morning guy?
Not at all.
All right. What time did you hit the sack last night?
10, but I'm still not a morning guy. So.
All right. Well, welcome, and thanks again for coming in and sharing your story, because it's a fascinating story. I'm going to have you pull a little closer to the microphone, if you don't mind. So, on your very first time out as a commercial fisherman is when this happened. I want to circle back to that in a minute. Tell us what was going on in your life before you decided to be a commercial fisherman.
Yeah, I was living up in Costa Mesa at the time, working in a surf shop, and in some sense kind of living the dream a little bit, having a lot of time to surf and just kind of having a pretty easygoing existence. But I think I began to run into a point where I felt like Orange County was great and I was liking surfing all the time, but it felt a little bit small in the grand scheme of things, that there was more I felt like I wanted to see and do. And I think over the course of the year before getting on the fishing boat, kind of had this pretty intense feeling of like wanderlust kind of, and wanting to get out of my environment and see some other things. But life was good in a lot of ways, and it's kind of funny looking back on it and thinking about how much I was like, I want to change this up, while also seeing how really idyllic my life was at the same time, where I was probably surfing more than I was ever in my life. I was surrounded by good friends and stuff like that, but I think there's sort of this call to maybe see what else was kind of out there beyond Newport Beach and San Clemente and all those places. I felt like I spent a lot of time. So yeah,
it's funny that you say that, because every surfer I know at 23, 24, 25 ends up being a surfer at 64, 66, 67 years. They never stop that. They're not as restless as you. Were you always kind of restless?
Yeah, I was always kind of restless. I feel like I don't travel all too much, but every time I do travel, whether it's like somewhere else in California or a lot to Mexico, or like my girlfriend and I just did this trip to Europe, I feel like the whole time I'm there, I'm like, how could I drag this trip on sort of indefinitely?
Right.
Could I see myself living here permanently? And like, I feel like every time I am somewhere, I'm always sort of curious about what it's like to like be there for a longer time, and experiencing sort of places that are different than what I'm used to is always very appealing to me. So yeah, definitely restless. I usually use the word like itchy feet, which I got from Into the Wild, that John Krakauer book, because the guy in that said he had itchy feet, and that's what kind of sent him off on his adventure. But when I stay in one place for too long, I kind of get the itchy foot feeling, and feel like I need to get going somewhere.
I keep a can of Tinactin here in my briefcase. Man. Like,
not that kind of itchy foot, fortunately.
Tinactin, man. So did I describe it correctly, that you were looking to make some money to maybe go to Australia and see what Australia had to offer?
Yeah, Australia was kind of my bucket list place. I'd already applied for the visa that would have let me stay there for a year, that working holiday visa. And before I went, wanted to kind of make a little stack of money just to have. And working on a fishing boat seemed like a pretty quick way of doing that. I'd also kind of had an interest in working on a fishing boat because I'd worked on boats prior. But I felt like fishing boats can be a hard job, but I feel like they're kind of the most intense way of getting familiar with sort of all the ins and outs of working on a boat. And I liked spending time on the water too, and thought it'd be cooler to spend time doing something that's very sort of in tune with the ocean. You're out in serious bodies of water, and you're going after fish, which kind of, is...
It lends to your adventurism. It really does. Your previous work on boats had been bartending, or
basically
essentially bartending on Catalina ferries and stuff like that, right?
The official job title was deckhand, but it was on the Catalina Flyer, which for the most part you're basically like a flight attendant on the sea. It's a lot less. You're only really doing deckhand activities when you're leaving the harbor and arriving. The rest of the time you're running drinks to people and stuff like that. So I was that was a job I kind of ran into a little bit of like, this is not the kind of adventurous, like, ocean going experience I was really looking for. And I loved the guys I worked with, and it was a cool job. Going out to Catalina every day was interesting too, but wanted something that was a little more beyond the pale, I guess.
The captain of the fishing boat that ended up sinking and the captain ended up passing away was a guy by the name of Michael Diamond. You called him Mick. Mm-hmm. How did you meet?
Mick had worked as the captain, or my friend had worked for Mick as a captain a few years prior, and Mick reached out to my friend that summer when I was looking for a job on a fishing boat and was trying to get my friend to come back along. And my friend had sort of moved off of that life trajectory. He had a girlfriend and a job that was a little more steady, so he just wasn't really into it, but he had heard I was thinking of doing that, so he actually just put us in touch. So I didn't meet him in person for the first time until I flew up to Washington, but he and I had talked on the phone a few times that summer, just going over the plans and what to bring up, that sort of thing.
When you first laid eyes on the boat was named the Evening. When you first laid eyes on it, the Evening, by the way, was constructed in 1941. It was a 43-foot fishing trawler. Uninspected. What does uninspected mean? It was exactly what I think it means?
Maybe not. Uninspected, it does mean, I actually think it does receive some sort of Coast Guard inspection. It's just not the highest level one. Like certain commercial boats, or especially passenger carrying boats, have to receive a specific Coast Guard inspection. Inspection means it's like registered with the Coast Guard basically, but not everything is on it. But it still has like the required safety equipment and stuff like that. It's just, it doesn't require the higher level inspection. But I did see that, and it was kind of, it wasn't, an 82-year-old wooden boat, and sort of being on there and seeing the uninspected sign definitely did sort of make me feel like this is an old boat, and it's not the sort of boat I sort of like am familiar with or was expecting his boat to be. It was actually new to him too at that point in time. He'd only had it for a year at that point. He had a previous boat prior.
So you would have done the same thing I did, is you got this weird feeling in your stomach about an 82-year-old wooden boat. And you're hoping that conditions are okay when you leave the dock and go off into the open sea. Was there any point where you thought, I'm not feeling good? Were you feeling any trepidation beforehand?
Yeah, I feel like typically I don't. What I'd say is I definitely had a little bit of trepidation before, but I think I had this weird tension between seeing the boat and looking at the weather forecast for the week and realizing how it didn't really look like there was going to be a great window for getting out of the harbor and having good weather at sea. Like it was pretty gnarly up there actually, with like early winter storms, kind of late fall storms, that sort of thing already rolling in, and sort of feeling like I'm not sure I want to go out there, but also realizing this was something I'd been thinking about doing for almost a year by that point, and made all these decisions that led me there, and didn't feel like I wanted to give into that feeling of trepidation too much. So I kind of kept them in mind, but I didn't give into them at the same time, which in hindsight I almost kind of wish I had trusted my gut more, but at that point in time it was like it felt important to follow through to me. You pressured yourself with your own peer pressure.
Exactly. It was like, all right, I got to do this.
And I think we've all been in situations where we think we have a gut feeling that we should listen to, and then we listen to it and we realize we were wrong about it too. And this was one of those where I was like, I don't want to feel a little bit afraid here and then end up not doing this thing that might be a very cool experience and something that I find rewarding and worthwhile. So just sort of had that voice in the back of my head, but listened to it, but didn't let it sort of lead the day, kind of.
So before you left, Mick made sure you knew how to use the radio, and you knew that the Coast Guard was on Channel 16 on that radio. He also pointed out this white canister on a wall that held the emergency radio beacon, which I want to come circle back around to that, and that would go off automatically if submerged. The life raft would release on its own. He explained all that to you. When you left the dock, which was a Thursday,
yeah,
was the weather okay?
Yeah, so we finally left because it looked like we were going to have a 3 to 5 day window of decent weather, and that was about the amount of time we're expecting we'd want to fish and then bring the fish back.
Right.
So when we left Thursday, it was actually beautiful, and my phone actually survived this whole experience. I have pictures from the boat that evening at sunset of how like glassy the water was. The sunset was like pretty magnificent. We were seeing we caught a lot of fish that day, just good conditions for fishing. You also just saw other kinds of sea life, definitely saw some whales and some sort of dolphins or porpoises out there, and it was pretty magical. And those fears we were just talking about, I think that first day I was sort of see, aren't you glad you didn't listen? This is really, it's a lot of hard work. You're fishing from sunrise to sunset, and you're working the whole time, but it's beautiful and it's pretty special. There's no other boat around you. You feel very much like you're out on the ocean, and it's kind of just you, the captain for me, and the boat in that case, and it's cool.
So you describe in your story that when you first laid eyes on the boat, that fishing lines were entangled with seaweed and stuff. Did that, and you ended up organizing and cleaning a little bit. That was part of how you made your pay. Was there a sense of disorganization about Mick? And I don't want to talk poorly about the dead, but was there a sense of disorganization with him?
Not exactly. I'd say there was more a sense of saltiness with him, where I think before we left harbor, he wanted everything to be ship shape and ready to go.
Right.
And I think between trips, things do get a little bit chaotic with him, but he definitely wouldn't have left harbor with anything kind of out of order. And even he wasn't particularly fastidious about anything, but also definitely had the ways you do things, and kind of wanted that to be clear, and he had his reasons for doing it that way. But I think I did have initial doubts about him as a captain, because I've known other captains and they're all different personalities, and he was definitely a saltier and slightly crazier seeming one. But over the course of the week before, or the 4 days before we left harbor, I did sort of get a better sense of him as being qualified and intelligent, knowing what he was doing. He'd been doing it for 30 years and no accidents until sort of the big one, obviously. So
that was a good gut feeling you had about him.
Yeah.
As Lisa can tell you, I'm quite fastidious and salty as well, man.
If anyone was the slob, it was me probably in that situation. So
before you, I know. Yeah, well, hey, that's the dust. Before you left, you had a cheeseburger. You called your mom. What'd your mom say before you left?
This is actually a point of contention between her and me. She claims that I had told her I probably wasn't going to go out on the boat. I told her some of my fears for sure. I remember the phone call.
Right.
But sort of remember ending the call with being we're definitely going to go out for the first trip.
Right.
Because we were planning to maybe do 2. It was late in the season. We were just trying to get a feel for each other before the following season.
Right.
But I told her I was probably going to do the first trip. She claims that I was planning on not going at all. But we talked about that sort of thing. And I was talking about kind of admitting I was a little bit afraid, and just sort of told her our schedule and stuff. But for the most part, it was when you don't have the awareness that a conversation's that important, it felt like a very standard conversation with my mom, and sort of if anything, I felt like the classic son kind of that situation where it's Mom, you don't need to ask all these questions. Everything's going to be fine. I'll call you in 4 days, that sort of thing. I love you. I'll talk to you soon. That kind of thing. It wasn't a particularly meaningful.
It was just It was just a conversation with your mom, and hey, I'll see you in a few days.
Exactly.
For you.
Yeah.
For her memory of it is a little different than yours.
Yeah, I also think so. My parents' whole perspective on this story is pretty shocking, because obviously I knew exactly what had happened and was going through it. They're on the East Coast, so everything is filtered through distance and just difficulties in communication that happened in this specific scenario pretty heavily. They didn't really have a sense that something had gone wrong until the following Monday. So 3 or 4 days after we had left harbor, just because they hadn't heard from me. They called the harbor master. The harbor master said there was a storm, so a lot of boats are still waiting to come back. Then the captain's family also called the harbor master, and that's when things began to sort of be put together that
Right.
maybe something had happened.
Right.
But they didn't know that we'd sunk yet. And I guess we'll probably get back to that. But
Right.
it basically took a week for them to start the search and rescue process. And that's when my parents were sort of like, oh man, something's probably seriously wrong. But by the time I got rescued at the end of this, was actually the first time my parents had heard what had happened when I called them from the boat that was taking me back to Canada.
Right.
So I remember telling my mom, I'm okay, like I got rescued, and she is like, what do you mean you got rescued? So
Right.
probably got ahead of your questions there a little
No,
bit.
no,
but
that's okay. That's
yeah.
okay. I will circle. I want
Yeah.
to circle back to that, but at 27,
Yeah.
all of us at 27, you're still kind of figuring out what you want to do. And at 27, you had graduated from the University of Virginia 5 years before that. You'd been living here. You were really just living a cool life, something you wanted to do. Your parents weren't really agreeing with the
Yeah.
life you were leading, right?
Yeah, they weren't entirely on board with it.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. And when you and I want to go back to the launch day. So it was a perfect day on Thursday.
Uh-huh.
You're out on the ocean. Everything's cool. The beautiful sunset. You're like, I'm glad I did this. When did the weather start to turn?
Sometime overnight, when I woke up the next day, after the first day, I fell basically right asleep. I think we had dinner. I don't even really remember, but I do remember getting down into my bed and just passing out. I had a book with me, didn't read it that night, just passed straight out.
Right.
The next day, I woke up around sunrise, and Mick, the captain, had already gotten up, and I had to go up a ladder to get to the deck. So I got up there, and things weren't awful yet, but the ocean was definitely significantly rougher. There's a lot more wind, and there had been basically no swell the day before, and we're already starting to get like the first little precursor swells of whatever the storm was going to be.
Right.
That were enough to rock the boat, but nothing that major. But he'd already gotten out on deck and was trying to fish, but I could see he was struggling a little bit just because the wind was tangling the lines that trail off the boat to catch the fish a lot.
Right.
So it was already a very different day. I didn't really have a sense that the storm, as it started that morning, was going to materialize into something much more intense. But the weather had changed like pretty significantly overnight, from pretty perfect conditions to less than ideal conditions by the following morning.
And do you get I've never done this, so I don't know. Do you get a report overnight from the Coast Guard, or does anyone send out a report to boats that might be out in the ocean going, hey, come on back?
There is the Coast Guard weather report that you can get. I think it goes a few days in advance, but once you're that far off the coast, we got very little radio reception, actually. Most of it comes from basically other boats that might be passing by, and you kind of get little chirps and things like that, but for the most part, you don't get a lot. We did kind of have a sense of the forecast going out, but I think up there, especially off Washington, things are liable to change, especially that time of year. So, no, we didn't really... I don't think we knew the sort of caliber of storm that was really coming in that well. At least I didn't. Maybe the captain kind of had a sense, and he may have, but yeah.
So it's late Friday, early Saturday. In that overnight, the storm had worsened.
Between Thursday and Friday.
Between
yeah.
Thursday and Friday,
Yeah.
the storm had worsened. So on Friday, you knew this is a bad storm.
Yeah, and I think so. On Friday, we weren't really having any luck fishing because just things were getting tangled. I think we got maybe a few fish on the line that morning in the few hours we were fishing when it was kind of fine enough to fish, which was like a small fraction of what we'd done over the course of the day yesterday.
Right.
And at a certain point, Mick decided we were going to go to another little area on the map to try fishing there. And if things didn't work out there with fishing, we were just going to go back to the harbor. It is funny because, I mean, even in a storm, the boat kind of can be a safe place. But I think over the course of the day, it began to dawn on him, and I think it was already dawning on me that maybe this was going to be a bigger storm. And even if it wasn't going to be a bigger storm, it was at least going to be big enough to keep us from fishing, so there was no point in staying out.
Right.
But yeah, I think it was beginning to dawn on us pretty quickly. I mean, the storm rolled in pretty fast. Like, Friday morning was unpleasant. Friday at noon was pretty rough. Like, by midday, I think I don't really have a sense of exactly what time was when things happened, but I don't usually get seasick, and just the rolling of the boat and all this stuff, I was beginning to feel pretty like nauseous and had to just sit there on the deck trying to like get my stomach to settle and stuff like that. So things had gotten pretty rough already.
You went out on the deck for an hour to catch your breath, to try and breathe in fresh air, and then it got a little too crazy out there and too cold as well. So you came back in. Was Mick awake or asleep when you came back in?
Mick was still at the wheel when I came back in, but I think that was around the time where he began to feel. I think people ask me what was going on with him a lot. I honestly think, based on my experience with people who may not take the best care of themselves and who are slightly older, when they get seasick, it can look like something far worse than seasickness.
Right.
When I worked on the Flyer, which is not particularly crazy, occasionally elderly passengers would get seasick, and we'd have to have either give them oxygen on the boat or have the EMTs waiting when we got to Avalon, just because it really affects them badly. And I think that's kind of what happened with him. So when I got back inside the wheelhouse, I think he'd been feeling sick and just asked me if I could keep an eye on the wheel. He was going to put it on autopilot back toward harbor, and he was going to lay down in his bed, which was right behind the wheel basically, but a little, like 3 feet away.
Right.
Yeah.
And then shortly after that, an hour passed, and then another, and then you were still obviously far from land, and the storm was getting worse.
Yeah.
And at one point, you made the decision it's getting too bad. That moment where you know that you've got to go. We got to do something else other than stay on this boat. You shook him awake. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so this all happened very fast. There was one point earlier where I'd woken him up just to check with him about something, because we were kind of riding in the trough of the wave, which was making it extra pitchy and rolly. So I asked him if we could adjust the autopilot, which was something I didn't actually know how to do on my own. So he had to walk me through it from the bed, basically.
Right.
And we did that, and then he went back to sleep. And things after that, I was like, okay, we're on our way back to harbor. It's going to take a while, but that's where we're going. We're going to make it. There was no doubt in my mind that we'd make it. And then probably like an hour or two later, the rolling sort of continued pretty severely. And at that point, I heard what was essentially like a loud bang. It was I actually can't remember right now, but I think it was the port side fishing mast, which is sort of like wings on the side of the boat that drag the lines.
Right.
Because of the rolling, had actually gotten thrown up into the side of the wheelhouse. And I remember looking out the back door and seeing it kind of wedged up there. And that made the boat feel like it was on a more serious list, but I don't know if that's what actually got us to start rolling. Then a few moments later, probably like a minute or two, we took a pretty large wave over the bow that just very quickly caused us to start rolling. And that was the point I knew we were rolling, because the boat just, you could kind of feel it. I think in the article I described it as sort of the feeling when you lean too far back in a chair and you can feel it going.
Right.
It's just sort of like you can feel the center of gravity not being where it's supposed to be, and in like an irrecoverable place. And that was sort of the feeling. So as soon as I felt that happen, I was very afraid, and went over to him and shook him out of bed and said, I think we're about to roll. And we did end up rolling onto our side, and he needed help getting out of bed. He wanted to try seeing if he could correct the roll just by turning us into the swell, so he had me help him into the captain's seat. But because the boat was maybe not fully 90 degrees on its side yet, maybe more like 60 or 70, the rudder wasn't doing anything. It was just sort of the end. And at that point, I think seeing him sitting there in the boat not doing anything, and us continuing to finish that roll to like 90 degrees on our side, I was like, we're sinking, we need to get off now. And that was when the sort of like emergency situation really arose in my head, that it was like serious.
So you went to the radio and you called Mayday.
Yeah, so while he was trying to correct the boat, I was like, we got to get out a Mayday call. So I went on the radio and called Mayday, and there's also like an automatic SOS button you can press on the radio that sends out the Mayday signal for you repeatedly, so you don't have to keep doing it.
Is that the beacon in the canister that we're talking about, or is that different?
That's a different thing, actually. So there's the radio, which every boat basically is equipped with, and then there's something called an EPIRB, which is the radio beacon you were talking about, and that is something that only some boats have, but many boats do have, and it's basically like a accident activated locating thing, so that if there is an accident that causes the boat to sink or a fire or something like that, it sends a signal to a satellite that sends a signal to like a local Coast Guard office, and then they will basically start a search and rescue procedure, but it gives them a general sense of where the accident happened and they know to go. Whereas a radio is just a radio. You can give them your coordinates off the chart, but it doesn't necessarily tell them locations or anything like that. So that white canister, the EPIRB, is actually sort of like a huge life-saving advantage in a situation like that, because it's really specific, and it goes off as like a fail-safe, or it's supposed to. Ours, of course, I don't think did actually work, which I guess happens sometimes too. But
so there was no testing of it before you went out.
Not as far as I know. I'm like a little curious about how you can really test those. I think there probably is a way to test them, but I feel like it's one of those pieces of equipment that's kind of like if you had a smoke alarm in your house and it didn't chirp when it was out of batteries,
Right.
you would never think to check it. And if
Right.
so I think that's kind of the same thing where that probably you just assume it's working, and it may have worked, and just because of its position, the way the boat sank, it does need to float to the surface, the EPIRB, to work correctly. And the boat did roll onto its side, and it's a fishing boat, so it does have all kinds of things that are kind of obstructive. I don't know if it made it to the surface. It maybe would have worked had it gotten to where it was supposed to go. I don't know, but basically the reason I don't think it ultimately worked, and it very well could have actually, was just that if it had worked correctly, someone would have been aware that the boat had sank basically as soon as it happened. And then on top of that, the search and rescue would have been a somewhat easier procedure, because they would have known the general area where it sank. I do know from after the fact that they didn't know when the boat sank or where it sank. So the search and rescue procedure that they actually had to do was just like a
massive,
scanning, I think, 10,000 square miles or something of open ocean, and they'd never spotted us, and I never spotted a plane either. And I'm not saying they didn't look. I know they did, but it's huge ocean, so I think it's like, it's pretty remarkable that anyone gets saved after something like that. I feel like without like the EPIRB, basically, because the ocean is such a huge place. But it happens. Yeah.
I want to, and again, not to slap Mick or anything, but there are times when, in a moment like that, there are people that freeze and people that don't freeze. When you made the decision it's time to get off the boat and go in the water, you described Mick as still being in his chair and holding on tightly to the chair, almost in a frozen-like state. Did he freeze?
I think there's like 100 interpretations of what happened that I've gone through in my head, and I don't think I'll ever have the like answer to which one is the correct one, if there is one correct one. I think he could have frozen out of like fear or stress. I mean, he'd been a fishing captain for 30 years. So I think another possible explanation is that he just recognized the severity of the situation and thought, this is kind of how I want to go. I know his life had its rough points and stuff like that, and just like I've met his kid since and just kind of know his story a little better than I did at the point where I was working for him even. And I think it may have just been sort of less of him freezing, maybe him just sort of being like, this is the way I was thinking I was going to go. It's finally happening.
Captain going down with the ship.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, or he was too, sick to even move, or it could have been that. Or there's also, like, sometimes I wonder too, making it to the life raft was definitely a good thing, and it was a 2-person life raft, so we definitely both could have been in there. There's a part of me that thinks more like charitably of what he was doing, is if that he kind of thought that both of us in the life raft is not going to be a great thing. He kind of
sustainable time.
Yeah, and he made the decision just to, in his head, that he's staying, he's ready to go, and that it gives me a better chance in the life raft if it's just me. Right. And there's like 4 of the interpretations I have, and I spin it over in my head a lot, just because it's, to me, that's the whole experience of being adrift was obviously a heavy one, but I mean that's the only time in my life where I basically witnessed someone die, and it not being a particularly clear situation as to like what made that happen is something that I think about still quite a lot. So
as we're talking here, and I do want to talk about the time, your experience in the life raft and that 13 days, and I'm getting just tons of texts that this is an unfathomable situation and they cannot imagine what you went through. You're in the water. And you find the lid of a fish hold. What's the fish hold? It's where you keep the fish that you catch? Yeah,
so in the deck where we're fishing from, it's filled with ice, and it's insulated with foam on all sides, but in order to open it up and throw the fish in, there's just basically a sheet of plywood with foam glued to it that insulates it and keeps it closed. That had floated free after the boat sank. So I actually had gotten outside the wheelhouse, but didn't make it to the life raft. I was sort of waiting on the side, seeing what Mick was going to do still, and ended up falling into the water. And the top of the fishing hold, this little door with foam attached, was the first thing I was able to get a hold of. And at that point, thought that was actually kind of going to be enough. I honestly thought for the first few days, but especially right after the boat sank, that I was going to hear a helicopter within the next 30 minutes, and it was just sort of about getting on something that would keep me afloat and as much out of the water as I could, because the water was freezing and I didn't have time to get into the immersion suit or anything that you'd ideally wear in a situation like that.
Was it pitch black?
It was dark and just no visibility. It's kind of like
Right.
it was still before sunset. I think the boat probably sank sometime around 3:30 or 4.
But stormy, dark.
Stormy dark, yeah,
Right.
and just no real like visibility. I like in my head, I still have like a pretty clear image of when I ultimately did make it into the life raft,
Right.
which I saw floating by. But I remember you can sort of see just the debris field, and things were so rough that everything scattered kind of quickly. But literally, it was like it felt like a 50-foot circle kind of around the life raft, and then everything just was like, blowing rain and clouds and big swells and stuff like that. And it's just sort of like you're out on the open ocean, but you can really only see like it feels like 25 feet, like basically across the street, like that kind of distance, which is, yeah.
Right. We saw that we said earlier that the life raft deploys automatically, and you're in the ocean. You're holding on to the fish hold. How far from you did you first spot the life raft, and did you immediately go toward it?
I saw it probably about 10 or 15 feet away. I was wearing my deck boots and like work pants and a flannel and a sweater, so I was not in like a great outfit for swimming.
Right.
And I know it couldn't have been that far away from me if I was able to make it over to it.
Right.
But as soon as I saw it, even though I was pretty confident I was going to be rescued
Right.
on the quicker side, I thought that's probably a better thing to be in than holding on to this, because it was pretty obvious to me I had to get out of the water because it was so cold and my clothes were not the ideal clothes to be in the water in.
Right.
So I swam over to it. So I don't think it could have been more than 10 feet, honestly. I don't think I could have swum that far and made it to there
Right.
in the conditions, but it felt like I had to swim to it in my,
What supplies are in a life raft?
That one had it had an oar, about 10 flares. It has about, I can't remember the exact amount, but I think it's like 250 milliliters of water. It's broken up into little like plastic pouches so you can kind of ration them over the course
So
of the.
less than a half gallon of water. Really.
Yeah, not a lot of
Right,
water.
Right.
I think I kind of did the math, and I was like, for one person, this is enough water to last 5 days, basically, because they had little instructions like you should drink, this much water at a minimum every day, and
Right.
that's it. And I was like, okay, that's 5 days worth of water. There's some little like ration biscuits that are kind of like, they're like bad shortbread cookies, kind of is the way they're like very similar tasting to a shortbread cookie, just like very dry and
Right.
like shelf stable tasting.
Right.
And then there's flares. There's a little first aid kit with like Band-Aids and some ointments, and there was an emergency fishing tackle kit and like a whistle and a signaling mirror and stuff like that. So just sort of assorted like signaling, survival, and first aid stuff, basically.
Part of what I read that kind of shocked me a little bit was the oar that you had was basically useless, and even if it was more useful, you didn't know which direction to row in.
Yeah, those life rafts are not super directional. They're not like a rowboat or a canoe. They're just a big square with a ballast net under the bottom to keep them from flipping over in a storm.
Right.
So paddling it is like, you really just won't move in a direction. There was later on in this experience when I could actually see the coast of what ended up being Vancouver Island off the coast of Canada.
Right.
I tried to paddle toward it and remember counting my strokes basically with the oar and sort of being, I think I probably did 5,000 or something like that.
Right.
And I would do like 100, then take a 30-second break, and then another 100 30-second break. So I was counting them in my head. And you could tell there's like debris in the water around me and stuff like that, and I could tell I wasn't moving anywhere through the debris in the water.
Right.
So I was like, this actually does not
It's
move
not-
me. I don't know what they have it on there for.
Right.
But yeah.
And I now, if it's okay and indulge me for a moment, I kind of want to get into your head, if that's all right on this trip. Aside with all of the supplies you had, there was the fishing kit, and in that fishing kit is a razor blade that's intended for filleting a fish that you catch. And you wrote, though it seemed to invite another use.
Yeah.
Tell us.
When I was in that situation, there was basically two options that were clear to me, that I was either going to be rescued, and that means I would live, or I wasn't going to be rescued, which means in some form or another I was probably going to die on the life raft, either through starvation or dehydration or exposure or whatever it was going to be. And seeing the razor blade there, it's sort of in my head, I was like, that might be something you actually might consider later on. And it was something in that moment. I wasn't planning on killing myself the first minute.
Right.
I was sorry for talking about that. On
No.
the radio,
That's why we're
yeah.
that's why we're having this conversation.
Yeah, the first minute I was there, but it kind of was like in the back of my head was like, this is a situation where you might realize you can't take the suffering anymore after a week without food or water and being freezing, and then you might actually end up having to do that. I pretty quickly decided that I was going to try to do. I kind of made quickly that if I didn't get rescued, I'd rather die trying anyways, and that was sort of my thoughts on the whole thing. But it was definitely mentally one of the most sort of it never felt more like that was actually something that I'd ever have to consider than on that life raft in those sort of moments. And it was something that returned into my head and stuff like that. But I think the kind of MO I adopted for myself was like, the best case scenario is to get rescued, and the next best case scenario is that if someone finds the life raft 6 months from now and I'm dead, at least I'm in the life raft. And for peace of mind of my parents, and also maybe just like a personal feeling of like having given it up my all, I'd rather die of starvation or dehydration or whatever it might be than to give up.
Right.
Yeah, because even if I am so weak that I can't go on and I pass out and I'm in the life raft floating around, then there's still a chance I could be rescued. If I'm dead, there's no chance.
Right.
So
and again, an unfathomable moment, an unbelievable reality that hit you in the face at that point. Thank you for sharing that with us. You mentioned that you prayed. Are you generally a praying kind of guy?
Not generally, no.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a little bit of religion in my upbringing, was definitely not raised in any real religious capacity. And I think maybe in the capacity that a lot of people maybe pray from time to time, was sort of the extent that I had done it, but nothing quite so charged feeling as it did in the life raft. But that was a situation. But I also think that the prayer that I sort of did on the life raft to me transformed. I sort of talk about this in the article, which was at first I was sort of praying in much more of like a bargaining type capacity, where I was sort of begging for my life in exchange for being rescued. I was going to be a better person when I got back. And I didn't really feel like that was working. And at a certain point, I never really stopped praying, but at a certain point there was sort of this feeling, and I talk about this in the article, just sort of this feeling of as the time went on, and I think the likelihood of me being rescued became less definite. I sort of made more peace with my situation, and then the prayer changed into something that I actually think, if I were a praying person now, this is much more in line with the way I'd sort of pray, which is just sort of like realizing that even in that very trying situation, there was still like the presence of something like kind of, I call it divine in it. And even like toward the end when the ocean calmed down again, I was able to see land and I could see sunsets and things like that. And there's just certain moments of things like, even though it was terrifying and I thought I was going to die, I still was like, there's still beauty here and I'm still alive and I'm still experiencing things. And it's sort of this feeling like, if there is a God, and in my case I do believe there is a God, if there is a God, he's here in this moment with me. And that's sort of what my prayer turned to later on. And that's the sort of prayer that I feel like it's harder in everyday life, because I don't really feel like the situations are there. Things feel much more normal, but it's sort of looking for the presence of something beyond you that is there with you in every sort of present moment. And that was the sort of prayer that toward the end of the time on the life raft I sort of fell into, and was, I don't really know what the right word for it, but I kind of like, I'm grateful for like having had that feeling. It was very enlightening feeling, just in terms of like life afterwards too. So I don't know if I explained it that well.
You explained it totally clear.
Yeah.
Absolute clarity. Thank you. And you're a remarkable person. I'm telling you this right now. You also mentioned that you prayed, part of that prayer was that you hadn't honored your mother and father, and you asked God to forgive you for the way you had treated your parents. Did you think about that last conversation you had with your mom?
I did. I think that last conversation, just other conversations we'd had, after college, when I sort of decided I was going to be, for all intents and purposes, a surf bum, they had their little doubts about the situation. And I think now I see it, were really just coming from a place of love. It was, I acknowledged that my life was somewhat precarious before this experience, but I was very comfortable with that. But I think from a parent's point of view, they just wanted to make sure I was, fulfilled for sure, but also able to afford rent and lunch
Right.
and dinner and
Right.
like these sorts of things that are sort of necessary for
Everything a parent wishes for their child.
yeah, and in my head I was like, I don't care about that. I lived in my van for a period of time. I was like, I can make it work. I'll make anything work. Like I don't really care. And I was happy about that, but I think from their point of view they would check in, and from my point of view they were, and I regret to say this now, but I thought they were like suffocating me.
Right.
So we still had a relationship, but there was always this feeling of sort of me feeling like I had to keep them at kind of an arm's length unless they started to criticize me and then would turn into a fight and that sort of thing.
Right.
I don't think they actually felt that way. I do think when you're like 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, and even 27, you can be a little bit immature about what you think your parents want from you and still can have a little bit of the adolescent mindset of like, you don't understand me. I didn't wish to be born. Like, let me do what I want. Like
Right.
just sort of all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And you,
It's normal.
yeah. And you realize, I mean, especially having gone through something like that wasn't exactly what they're doing. And I think my biggest regret was that I just didn't see things from their point of view and treated them as if they were some sort of like, not enemy, but some sort of like opponent in my life a little bit.
An obstacle.
Right. And realizing, especially thinking about what, I didn't know what they were going through when I was on the life raft, but assumed that they'd been notified that we were lost at sea or something like that.
Right.
And thinking about what that must be like going through their point of view, because they've always been loving, supportive parents, even though I thought we had our differences, and I just couldn't imagine what it's like to sort of be like, hey, we like want to make sure you're safe and happy, and then for me to go out and do something that almost resulted in me dying.
Right.
That was, I think, the largest part of my guilt, was just that I felt like the thought of them having to lose me as a son, and that sounds self-centered to say, but just the pain that would cause them because of my own decisions, and I felt very guilty about that.
Right.
Yeah.
And that must have been another driving point in wanting to survive so badly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. And I think in some sense, yes, I wanted to survive for myself, but I also think like probably that was probably the biggest one, honestly, but also the next biggest one was definitely this feeling of like, I think for me, it was like, I want to live because I've still got a life that I want to live and things I want to experience, and I hope this happens so that I can happen. But I also think there was this feeling of like, right next to that of, yeah, I want my parents to not, at this point in their lives, have to deal with the loss of a son prematurely.
Right.
And I think that was the stronger thing. And talking about the razor blade and stuff like that, that was when I felt like, if I do everything in my power to stay alive and things don't work out that way, that would make me feel better. But I also imagined, and I don't know, I think it would. I think that would have made my parents feel better too, than to know I had maybe given up. Not because they're like, don't be a quitter, but much more in the sense of like, I think if you see someone in that situation who decides they can't bear it anymore, the next thought you have is, it must have been so terrible. But I guess if I tried to survive till the end, there's some sort of feeling that like maybe he died peacefully or something like that.
Right.
A lot of the decisions I was making were sort of out of the thought of like my parents, who were not there with me obviously, but they were very much like present in my mind throughout the
I want to talk about a presence that you did feel with you in just a little bit, but first of all, you're on the water now, 5, maybe 6 days. Hadn't seen anything, not a helicopter, not a plane, nothing. Desolation for 5 or 6 days of drifting, and you launch a flare into the sky. Did you see the first ship at that point?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the very first flare, I had 10 flares about. The very first flare I used was one of the rocket flares that flies up in the air and leaves like a trail and stuff like that.
Right.
That first one I absolutely wasted. I was so panicked, even though I was on the life raft, that I was just like, maybe there's a helicopter, maybe they can't see us exactly, just send up a flare and they're going to come right here. And I sent one up and obviously nothing happened. And after that, I was pretty clear to me. I was like, you only have 9 of those left. You're probably going to need all of them, and you have to save them for when you see something. And over the course of being out there, I actually, probably around day 5 or 6, like you said, did see boats every now and then. Especially the storm started to sort of die down around the end of the first week of being out there. So there were other boats out there. I think I couldn't tell what a lot of them were, but like maybe other fishing boats and stuff. And I remember the first one I saw, I did try to signal with the other rocket flare I had, but they were all the way at the horizon. And still, when the sea's like that rough, I think it's pretty hard to see anything. And I look like maybe I was kind of a little bit off the side or behind their boat. So from their point of view, they're probably just not even looking that way. So It's just, you realize that even if you see a boat, they probably don't see you. And going back to sort of talking about despair, that was the real moment of like real despair. Was like feeling like there was another boat out there, and then realizing they still couldn't see me from the distance or the direction they were going. And then the next couple flares I used, because I ended up using almost all my flares for things I saw that I thought could rescue me, was probably a few days later when two larger ships were, I became aware of them because they were signaling to each other with their horns.
Were they cargo containers?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't know if I said this in the article, but I was able, one of them passed close enough when they ultimately passed that I could read the names on the containers on the side, and it was a Hapag-Lloyd ship, and it was towering over me. Like, I could basically see both of these boats. They were probably, I don't know, it's so hard to gauge distances being without anything to reference, but also just through memory. But it felt like they weren't like maybe a half mile away, you know, they didn't feel far at all. They felt very close. And I did use, I think I'd run out of my rocket flares by that point. I think there were only two. And in that situation, I was like, that would have been the ideal flare to have, because there's no way they would have missed it. But it was daytime, so I had a hand flare that I was waving, and then there were little cans of orange smoke, and I used one of those too, because I thought there was no way they wouldn't be able to see me just from the distance. But those are huge ships, but I think they only have crews of like 9 or 10 people a lot of the time. And when you're way up in the bridge or on deck or anything like that, something that's about 8 by 8 feet in the middle of the ocean is just, especially if there's any swell to hide it, it's invisible. So I really don't think they could see me. Like, I'm sure if they'd seen me, they would have rescued me. So it's just
so even the canisters of hand smoke, which are like a fluorescent orange or a fluorescent yellow, no notice, no anything. Once they passed you by, there has to be just a despondent feeling that, my God, if they were that close and they couldn't see me, I'm done.
Yeah, I think there was this weird feeling I sort of had that was that after there's the two cargo ships and the boat I'd seen earlier on, after that experience, I was kind of in the back of your head, because I was despondent. I was like, I don't want to see another boat out here unless it's the boat that rescues me, because it's just sort of this feeling of being, when you're just in the life raft hour by hour, you're just sort of surviving, and you sort of make peace with the passing of time and stuff like that. When you're exposed to another boat, and in one case there was actually a very small plane I could see that I tried to signal, which was probably never going to happen, but there's sort of this feeling of like my rescue is close, and then when the situation closes without the rescue happening, it's pretty impossible to maintain like a positive attitude after that, because I think I was pretty capable of sort of making myself feel, for lack of a better word, positive in sort of the moments of just like getting through the day. But when you're so close to rescue and then rescue doesn't materialize, it's almost impossible to keep your mind from going back to some of the darker places that you feel like you'd already kind of gotten rid of, because it kind of reminds you in stark colors of like the real nature of your situation, which is that you might not be rescued. That little hope you have in the back of your head that you might be rescued is probably not going to happen. So yeah.
I'm framing this question this way because it really is the only thing that I had to grasp on was a fictional characterization of what you did. So I don't mean this in any way to be funny or anything, but in the movie Castaway, Tom Hanks has the volleyball, Wilson, and you describe a sense that you weren't alone on the life raft. What was it that you felt that was with you?
Yeah. So on a larger sense, when I didn't feel alone, I think there was this sort of like abstract divine presence that, especially toward the tail end of being on the life raft, was there earlier on. And I think this is probably what you're referencing, was probably maybe 4 days in, still kind of early on when it was still stormy. And I don't really know what I felt. And this is sort of the funny thing, because I did include it in the article, and my editor let me include it, even though I think her editor was sort of like, I don't really understand exactly what this is about. Was this mention of the thing called like an IOB?
What is that? Yeah.
I have no idea. And it was one of those things where it was like in my head, it was just like, I haven't watched Castaway since this experience, but I've seen Castaway. And I think part of like Tom Hanks' character very really identifying a volleyball with like a person, and there's no like jump that's being made in his head. It's just like, oh, this is just Wilson, you know, like he's able to do that because I think of his like isolated survival type state. And I think for me, whatever was going on in my brain at that point in time, it was just, I made this very quick thing where I was like, oh, I'm not alone. Like very matter of factly, I had that thought, and I was like, and what's here is with me is the IOB. And those letters were not any letters I'd really encountered anywhere before, but it was just sort of this thing, and I could like really feel like there was something there, like there was actually something like watching me from some not too distant place, like physically, like that. And I don't really know what it was, but it was like a very peaceful feeling. And my sister, after this happened, she was asking me, have you heard of like the I think it's called the third man theory, but it's a lot of people in near death situations feel this, and it's, I guess, so I wasn't alone in having it. It's just sort of this very physical presence of something that they described. And I think what she sent me about it was similar to what I experienced. And what was interesting to me in this specific one was that I was having this feeling, and in my head it was so real that I actually ended up looking out the life raft and saw. And it was bizarre because it's really, I hadn't seen any other sign of life, and the seas were still fairly rough. But like right outside the life raft was an ocean sunfish, which is a pretty prehistoric looking fish, and it was right outside the life raft, and it was high up in the water, so its dorsal or whatever, the dorsal fin was.
They look like a shark. It looks like a big shark, right?
And it was out of the water, and it was just flapping like it was waving. It's like it looked like a hand sticking out of the water waving,
right.
And I was like, that is, I was obviously probably like a little bit delusional, but it was like, to me, that is the IOB, and it was just like no idea what the IOB was, and have looked like, I kind of was like curious after the fact because those 3 letters stuck with me afterwards. Right. It was like that was a real enough feeling experience that I was like, what does it mean? And I think
it's a mantra.
It's a mantra, and like, yeah, the one most interesting thing was I have some friends who were raised more religiously than me, and one of them referenced this like, oh, that's where like the Greek spelling of Job, like from the book of Job. So it's just all this sort of thing, but I think it's like a lot of aspects of this story, like it's probably 1,000 different interpretations, and I don't really know exactly what that was, but it was this feeling of like a physical presence with me, even though I know there was no one actually there besides the sunfish that was in the water. But the sunfish became my friend in that moment. I was, I waved back.
So you write in the article that you'd often thought that if you died and your body was never recovered, that no one would ever know how desperately you actually did cling to life, but the IOB would know.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that was part of it too, is this sort of feeling of, from the time the boat sank until I was rescued, every experience I had was one where I was the only witness to it,
right.
Which is, I think, never a very common part of human life, but I feel like especially in like the modern day, just most of our lives are like very witnessable. Like we never feel like we're doing something that no one else doesn't know about. And I think being alone for 13 days where you're the only person who can judge your own actions and make decisions, and your decisions are purely limited by what you're capable of in that situation, but you're only making them with you in mind, basically, you actually really start to kind of miss the feeling of like some sort of person there to bounce it off of. And I think that's part of what the praying was and the IOB was. It's like when you're alone, there's sort of a desire to not be alone in some sort of capacity, to have someone see what you're going through or respond to your thoughts and things like that. So
do you ever think about how the 13 days would have unfolded had Mick made it into the raft? Would it have been different? You would have had half the supplies. Did you ever think of that while you were out there?
I didn't think about it so much when I was on the raft. I did think about Mick when I was on it, and I think, like, I think maybe I talked about this in the Atlantic article a little bit, but I don't know if I did. So worth saying was that at first I was like pretty furious with him, even though I'd made it into the life raft. I thought it was sort of his fault that we'd ended up in this situation. I was pretty mad, and I think those feelings of anger pretty quickly turned into a feeling of pretty extreme guilt, where even though I was at first mad at him, I sort of realized I was fortunate enough to survive that situation. He was now dead, and that maybe I hadn't done everything I could to make sure he wasn't dead. So he was very present on my mind, but I didn't really think about the nature of what it would have been like to have the two of us on there until after I got rescued. And I do think, I mean, we would have had half the water, and I did run out of water before I got rescued, so we would have run out of water twice as fast.
Right.
But, I think it's one of those things in life too, where it's any small little change could have made everything change. Maybe if he had been there, somehow we would have been rescued on day 3 or something. I don't know. But, like, I do think in terms of just the material and the space that's on the life raft, right. I can't imagine. It's actually, I think I said it was a 2-person life raft. I think a life raft that size is technically a 4-person life raft. Right. And I can't imagine what it would be like with 4 people in there for 4 days. So it's pretty, even 2, I think, would have been
tight space,
right. Not enough food and water to really last much more than probably 3 days, even with careful rationing of it. I
want to get to the, once again, I want to circle back to the life raft in a minute and the rescue itself. At any point in whether it was hallucinatory or not, at any point did you feel like an out-of-body thing where you could see yourself on the ocean from above? Was there anything like that?
Not exactly. I did have the most sort of common, the closest thing to that probably was some of the dreams I had were just, were so sort of reality bending and vivid that it was kind of hard, at least from initially waking up from them, to be able to tell them that they weren't real. And there were some of them that were sort of this feeling where I was like maybe somewhat out of body, but definitely nothing like the classic sort of suspended from above you kind of thing. But definitely some sort of strange, like, reality bending type things for sure.
Okay. And the life raft itself had a cover on it to protect you from wind and obviously the elements. Did that cover ever act as a sail where the wind could push you forward a little bit?
I think probably it must have. The boat or the life raft over the course of the 13 days drifted, I think, like 150 miles from where we roughly sank off the coast of Washington to where I was rescued off the coast of Vancouver Island. And I think a lot of that had to do with just currents from the storm and being pushed by swells and stuff like that.
Right.
Using the tent as a sail wouldn't really work, just because it's the whole design of that life raft, I think, is to keep it as kind of low profile from storms and wind to keep it from flipping. But it definitely is affected by it because you just have large surface area exposed to the wind. Right. And I think, probably part of what made me drift that far was the wind from the storm blowing in that direction for 6-7 days before, because I basically by the second week was kind of when I think I arrived off the coast of Vancouver Island. Right. So most of the drifting had happened in that first week or so because I could kind of see the island off the horizon. But yeah, was your question? Yeah.
You describe a moment, and I'm not sure if it's night 11 or 12, but I get a lump in my throat even recapturing that moment here. You were so cold. You were still kind of wet. Your clothes were still actually wet after 12 days, really.
Yeah.
You were shivering. You couldn't sleep. You were out of food. You were out of water. You knew you weren't going to survive much longer. And at that point, your hopes for rescue were evaporating, and so did your despair at the same time. Why? How?
Yeah. I think it kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier, which is sort of this feeling that, I guess, to get the most philosophical with it, which is not probably fully developed when I was there, but having reflected on it, is that at any point in our lives, like we all know we're not going to live forever,
right?
And we all know at the end of our lives, everyone will die, but that tends not to keep us from finding meaning in our life, even though we know that at some point in the future we're going to die. And I think in that case, my death felt much more looming. It was probably only a few days away, but I think there was still this sort of feeling that is like, you know what, like I'm out of food and water, I'm freezing, I haven't really slept a full night in 4 nights or something like that at that point.
I was wondering about your sleep.
Yeah.
Like, how much did you sleep? Could you?
I slept. I actually feel like I always tried to stay awake during the day because the day felt like the most important time to sort of keep an eye out for someone who could rescue me, but more often than not, because I didn't sleep very well at night because it was very cold, I'd end up passing out at various points throughout the day, which I sort of ended up working to this like kind of little daily schedule where I would allow myself to fall asleep during the day.
Right.
So long as I did like certain things, like I had to like, I don't know, like I would like tidy. There's always just like a mess in there, and like I said, I'm actually kind of a slob in my daily life, but I feel like there, because it's just small space, I felt like I had to keep things as dry as possible and organized. So I'd like take off articles of clothing and try to get them to dry off my body and stuff like that, or wipe water off the mat, basically that's the bottom of the raft and stuff like that. But for the most part, I'd probably sleep like, if I had to guess, like 4 hours every night. The nights felt very long because I wasn't asleep for them. I'd wake up and nights were always the one thing where you kind of were waiting for them to be over. Days you kind of hope they wouldn't end because
that was a better chance of being rescued.
Yeah.
Talk to us about the rescue.
Yeah. So that last night when I'd sort of begun to make peace with this, I didn't sleep at all. So this was so I got rescued on the 13th day, so it was night 12 basically. I didn't really manage to sleep at all. I was freezing. I think the temperature had dropped probably something like 15, 20 degrees. It felt like it was way colder. I don't know if it was just because I drifted north, but I'd been able to fall asleep. Originally, backtracking here, there were these emergency blankets that I didn't actually mention in the supplies on the life raft, but they sort of started falling apart after a few days of use. So by the second week of being on the life raft, I'd actually used the pouch that all the materials came in and kind of ripped it open and tried to use this like a blanket, but they offered no real warmth and it was really too small for me to get under. So that's when my sleep really started to suffer because I just couldn't get warm at night. Right. But that last night I was freezing and really just couldn't stay asleep for more than probably 20 minutes at a time. And then finally the next morning, when the sun hit the side of the raft, it got warm in there very quickly. And I was like, okay, I think I could probably actually get some rest now. But part of like I was talking about a moment ago is that I kind of had these little like rules I'd set for myself. I was like, you just got to do this at least and then you can go to sleep. So I was like, first rule for me was that I had to look out and just see if there's anything on the horizon. You at least had to check. And I did that. And this was probably the one day where I was probably most tempted to actually break that rule and just like get some sleep. Like, you're probably not getting rescued. It hasn't happened yet. But I decided to look and I could actually see closer than anything else I'd seen. So I felt initially very confident that this might be the moment of fishing boat passing. Like, I didn't even have to like look, like the flap only looks one way out the life raft,
right?
So you kind of have to like stick your head up and look over the what essentially is the roof. Right. This fishing boat was passing like perfectly in perfectly in line with the door, like the flap on the life raft. So it was just like the first thing I saw, and I think my heart just kind of like dropped in like a positive way for the most. But I was like, oh, this could be it. Like, this could be the rescue. If this isn't it, that's it. But this could definitely be it. And I had one flare left because at this point I'd wasted basically every flare on either things I thought were going to rescue me or not. Just wasted them because I was delusional earlier on in the experience and thought just send them off, whatever.
Right.
And I had one hand flare left, which is just like a stick with fire on the end of it. And I was holding it in my hand, but I was afraid to light it because I think I'd sort of made this connection between that last flare and like being rescued. So the first thing I did was take that oar that hadn't really been useful at all and start waving it over my head, screaming, saying like, hey, I'm over here. Right. Rescue me. And then when they got to the point where they were going to be closest to the fishing boat that was passing, I did light the flare and I was screaming at the top of my lungs the whole time as I was like, if this isn't it, it's not going to happen. No more flare, no more water, whatever. This is like definitely the last chance of being rescued. I might not die today, but I probably won't be rescued after today. So I'm screaming, and then finally I can't scream anymore. The flare burns out, and I stop to catch my breath. And I hear, they're close enough where they could yell back to me, and I can hear them. We see we're coming, and I see the boat turning toward me. And I think it's just like, there's certain things that, for what they are not that impressive. Like, we've all seen a boat approaching us at some point in our life, but the feeling of seeing something change its course and then just get bigger and bigger until it filled up my whole field of view, I was crying the whole time because it was just all of a sudden so real to me. And the guys on the boat who I didn't know at the time were Canadian fishermen. I didn't know until probably 15 minutes into talking to them. Yes. That they got me on board, and I, like, to this day, I've been trying to get back up to Tofino in British Columbia, or they don't live in Tofino. That's where I got brought to shore. They live in a town called Souk or Ukluet nearby, and I've been trying to get back up to visit them because they're like the closest thing to like saints or angels I think I've ever met in other people. Where they got me up on the boat, and I think of all the questions like they could have asked, they're like, they're just like, oh, how long you been out there? And I said, I don't actually know, what day is it? And they said it's the 26th. I said 13 days, and they said, boy, you must be hungry. And then the captain started cooking for me, and he made probably 12 of these little like breakfast sandwiches in their little galley on the boat. And I thought they were for everyone on the boat, like his crew and stuff. So he gave me one, and then I just sat there kind of quietly. He's like, no, those are all for you. And they were just plying me with food, and he sent one of his crew members who was roughly my size to get me some clean clothes to put on that were dry. Just like the guy was still much bigger than me, so it was like a giant pair of sweatpants and a big hoodie, but it was like dry clothes. And they called the Canadian Coast Guard. I asked them if they were from near Westport, which is the harbor we had left from in Washington. I was like, are you guys from Westport too? And they said, no, we're from Ukluet. And I said, oh, is that near Westport? And they said, they didn't even know what Westport was, I guess. And they were like, no, we're from this is like, it dawned on them that I didn't know that I was in Canada. And they're like, you're in Canada. So the Canadian Coast Guard came and took me off their boat and brought me to shore in Tofino, which is a town I'd actually wanted to visit, and finally got to go there. They brought me to the hospital, and pretty miraculously, like, basically I'd lost probably 20 or 30 pounds. At the end of the day, they let me take a bath in the bathroom because I just asked if I could do that. And it was like the first time I'd really seen my body after those 13 days. And I'd always been kind of a skinnier guy up to that, but it was like, shocked how much weight I'd lost, and I could see my ribs and veins in places where I didn't really know I had them. But other than that, was actually fine. And 2 Canadian Mounties, literally, they were from the Maritime Division, came to the hospital and helped me get back to the U.S.-Canada border, which was I didn't have my passport or anything, so it was a little bit of like an operation, I guess. And they dropped me off at the U.S.-Canada border, and I walked across and took the bus to Seattle, and flew back to my parents' house in Maryland, and that was sort of the end of the story.
They gave you some money, take the bus. Just
Yeah.
a couple bucks.
Actually, the bus driver let me on for free, which was nice. And the 2 Mounties, I think at a certain point they just were like, I don't think they intended to take me on as like somebody that they have to buy lunch and dinner for.
Right.
But every time we passed a restaurant, they'd ask me if I was hungry, and I was just kind of, the first month after my rescue, I think I probably ate something like 8,000 calories a day. Like I just couldn't stop eating. I was like voracious, and every time we'd pass like a McDonald's or a Tim Hortons on the way to the border.
Tim Hortons.
Yeah, because there's a long drive from Tofino to. We had to actually stop overnight at a hotel and then take a ferry across and then drive through Vancouver. So it's like it was I think like a 10-hour drive or something like that. So a lot of Tim Hortons breaks and stuff like
a lot
that.
Of Timbits.
I think we all think, or we all like to believe, that we really know ourselves and know what we would do in a situation or whatever. What did you learn about yourself?
Yeah.
I'm still figuring that out. I think I think one way I kind of think about this is that whatever got me through that situation is not something I went into that situation knowing I had. And so sometimes people will say to me, like, there's no way I could survive something like that. You must be special. But I don't feel like that's true, because I didn't go into this situation feeling like I was the sort of person who would survive this. I think you really just don't know much about yourself. And I think, I still don't. And I think part of it is like I feel like I go through life trying to know myself, but also realizing even though yourself is probably your most knowable sort of person in your life, it's pretty hard to know who you are really. But I think just in terms of like the things I care about and sort of my relation to the world is sort of what I ended up learning the most about, which is just that it's funny, like when you do think that maybe you're not going to have a life, especially at like a younger age, but I think at really any point in your life this could happen, especially when you're, you just expect to have more life ahead of you, and all of a sudden the prospect of that seems like it's diminishing. You realize what in your life actually sort of matters more than what you maybe thought did. And I just think so much of it too is all kind of small, and it's not very philosophical, but it's just like I feel like now I think I'm way more effusive towards people I love and care about, and people maybe who I don't know well enough to like love. I still try to make them know I care about them, because I do think there's something just really like beautiful about being alive, and we're all going through our own things. So I could almost tear up saying this myself still, because it's something that means a lot to me. But just there's a lot of people go through suffering through their day-to-day lives, and I went through a specific form of suffering. We don't always know what it is, and it's just really this sort of feeling of like the only thing that really got me through that situation maybe was a little bit of prayer and like survival instincts maybe, but I think the biggest part was feeling like they were people who I needed to see again, and being back with those people, and even people who I didn't really know before that, but just being back around people, you sort of realize how much, I don't know, it sounds very kind of hippie, but like just how much you like want to love everyone who's around you. And I think that's sort of the biggest thing is, that's sort of like, to me, like the most beautiful thing about being alive is just sort of the chance to be, on the planet and seeing all the beauty of God's creation and stuff like that, but also really just being with people and having the opportunity to be like kind and get to know people, because it is just, you don't realize it is like, that is when you don't have that for 13 days, you realize how amazing it is just that people are around. And that, I think that's sort of the thing I try to carry the most. And it's like my girlfriend, I feel like she's always like, you always like just have to talk to everyone, and I don't think I was that way before. And it's just, I think it is something now where it's just like, I don't know, like it's just like the simplest way. I just really love being around anyone now, and like especially I just told my story for probably was close to like an hour, but I really like just like hearing other people's like stories, because I just think it is, everyone thinks this story's remarkable, and I think I've met so many people and like have friends that they think they have like small things that are less remarkable, and you hear them talk about it and you're like, that's actually just as poignant and beautiful and full of meaning as anything else. And that's like literally all 7 billion people on the planet in some way or another. And I think that's the sort of kicker of this story for me, is really just that, which is a little ambiguous, but yeah.
No, it's not. Beautifully described.
Yeah.
And I believe, I'm feeling from you that every single moment moving forward has more value.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not always. I'm still a human, and I feel like,
Yeah.
like get bummed in traffic. But yeah, you do try to remind yourself.
Right.
You're like, come on, Alec.
Right.
Like, think about that, and like, is this really that bad?
Right.
Like, you're still happy to be here. You know.
You go
like,
right back to the raft and go, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah, I try
what's
to.
important here?
Yeah.
Just don't sweat the small stuff.
Yeah.
Alec Frydman, I've interviewed 20,000 people about every subject in the world, never ever like this. I'm delighted that you took the opportunity to share this story with our audience. I look forward to knowing you from this moment on. I look forward to keeping in touch. I look forward to your life and being able to share your experiences as often as possible. I asked you earlier, is there a book? Will there be a book?
Maybe one day.
All right, okay.
You're an excellent writer, very articulate.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
told this story
Yeah.
beautifully.
Yeah. I can't thank you enough for being here. Your parents, anything you want to say to them before we go?
Love you, Mom and Dad. Yeah. It's my mom's birthday 2 days ago, so happy birthday, Mom.
Happy birthday,
Yeah.
Mom. Right on.
Yeah.
All right. All right. And I look forward to, again, I look
My
forward
dad's
to...
is next week, so
Oh,
happy
there we
birthday,
go.
Dad,
Happy
too.
birthday,
Yeah.
Dad, ahead of time, man. Right on.
Yeah.
All right. Alec, thank you so very much for being with us today.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Really
Yeah.
appreciate
Thank
your
you.
Nice to
time.
meet everyone. Yeah.
9:10 the time. It's the Mornings with Ed show. It's the all-new Voice of Laguna.